Welcome to The Nation. I'm Jessie CHAHAL. Today, the focus is education on the back of the Budget 2026 as the nation and Malaysia prepares for the new budget. The question is how resources will be invested in terms of school, teachers and students, and how will that determine opportunities for years ahead. Joining us right now are Samuel Azaya, Executive Director of PEMIMPIN, and CHERYL and Fernando from the Global Institute at Teach for All. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Such an important discussion here today. Of course, education does shape not only young minds, but definitely the nation's future as well. Now, Budget 2026 is upon us. Not too long to go till we hear that being tabled. What do you see as the biggest priorities for education in Malaysia right now, CHERYL?
So for me, as I was thinking about this question, I think I still go back to the fundamentals. I think it's important to ensure that we still are pushing for stronger foundational literacy and numeracy among students, and ensuring that they continue to develop mastery in literacy and numeracy. I think it's easy to get sidetracked, and while it's very important, but it's easy to get sidetracked with AI and with pushing to be a digital nation, but we cannot forget the fundamentals that are still very important and essential for so many of our children to be able to get access to proper and strong literacy and numeracy. So for me, I really hope that the budget continues to emphasize this as key for our schools.
Samuel?
Yeah, I mean, just to echo what CHERYL is saying, I think foundational literacy and numeracy should be a priority. I think the government last year, they launched something called Program Anak Kita. It was a whole-of-nation approach with a specific budget allocated to it, about 100 million ringgit, to address learning loss in the country. So my point is, I think that needs to be sustained because the data and the numbers don't favor us. 4 out of 10 Malaysian kids at the age of 10 years old can't read and comprehend a simple paragraph. That's the stat that's going on. And from what we see, global trends and the data that we have right now, that doesn't seem to be getting any better anytime soon. So what I would like to add, I think for initiatives like Program Anak Kita, a whole-of-nation approach, I think it's good, it's great, it brings together everybody from different walks of life, from different expertise. But I think what needs to focus on is the sustainability of it. Because at the end of the day, if the initiative is designed to be a one-off initiative, and the system and the policies don't change, one would argue that it's pointless. And speaking about policies, I think, I guess the budget will not announce new policies, but it's actually an injection to the existing policies or newer policies that will be introduced. I suppose if there is an allocation, some sort of allocation needs to be put into how are we implementing these policies effectively.
Yeah.
I think the evidence over the past 10, 15, 20 years, not just in Malaysia, but globally. But if you are looking specifically at Malaysia, we've got great policies, we've got great blueprints, we've got great initiatives that we have launched, but the implementation always falls apart. And I think that's where some of the resources should go.
And what you'd like to see is that long-term plan going into fruition for it to have some results, for it to be seen through beginning to end without it being disrupted or altered or improvised and so on and so forth. Fair enough. Well, the government has highlighted as well, CHERYL, inclusive education and has stated that this is key to breaking cycles. From your perspective, how can education really help to uplift students from disadvantaged backgrounds if we're looking at early childhood and also those with special needs?
So I think one of the recent initiatives was to make preschool compulsory, and I think while that is like amazing, I think it now comes to the question of how do we ensure that the rural and underserved areas also have the infrastructure. So that means you have enough tadikas, you have enough access to very good kindergartens for these students to be able to get the mandatory preschool. I think that's one. I think when we talk about special education, it's also, I think something like Sam mentioned just now, the whole-of-nation approach. How do we ensure that parents are also playing an important role in this? And parent education is also important in this, ensuring that the policies reach to the parents so that they are able to understand, okay, if my child has special needs, what do I need need to do? How can I support them at home? Because I think it's only so much, right, that the schools or that the government can do, but then the rest of it depends on like the other parts of the society to also contribute to this. So I think ensuring that the reforms are more equity based, especially when it comes to underserved communities, I think will really benefit the community.
And we talk about, all stakeholders basically in this taking more responsibility. Sam, from your experience, what are some of the key on-the-ground issues that you think teachers and schools face in terms of how it should be reflected in this budget?
I think fundamentally, just to add on to what CHERYL has said, I think she mentioned about equity-based interventions. I think schools have often been seen as an institution that operates in silos. So you've got one school A is doing its own thing, school B is doing its own thing and all together. But a lot of best practices, if you're looking at countries like Vietnam, in recent PISA scores showed the most increment within the Southeast Asian region. They do the fundamental things right. They get schools to partner with one another, to share best practices, to mentor one another. I think that approach is something that suits Malaysia as well. So back to your question about what are the issues on the ground. I think I've been a teacher for almost 10 years. CHERYL has been a teacher as well. And these issues seem unresolved. A few key things that teachers want, or schools or classrooms want, is number one is time. Teachers don't have time. And if we want to see any policies be implemented effectively, you need to give opportunities to teachers to do what they were hired to do in the first place, which is to teach. The second thing is training or professional development, if you can put it that way. I think a lot of teachers seek professional development. I think in the work that we do in PEMIMPIN as well, we have seen a lot of teachers volunteer to be trained, to upskill themselves. But oftentimes, I think when we provide something that doesn't suit what they need or something that they can adapt to their own context, that is that gap as well. And ultimately, I think when we speak about time, when we speak about training, I think a key area that's always neglected is the mental health of the teacher. A lot of stats, a lot of data talk about how a lot of teachers are actually deteriorating when it comes to their mental health. And they can't deal with the pressure, they can't deal with the expectations. It is a very, I would say, front-facing job. You've got multiple stakeholders expecting the world of them. We also look at the role of a teacher. Everybody expects a teacher to solve everything under the sun, whether it is inclusive ed, whether it's special education, whether it's financial literacy, everything. So the pressure is going on teachers, and they are not ready, or they're not given the space to do that. So I think when it's coming to reality, we really need to make sure that if we are basing this entire hypothesis on we are getting the best teachers to teach in the classroom, how are we making sure that these teachers are teaching effectively? And I think there should be focus on this part.
Well, I think, thanks for highlighting that. I mean, just to reiterate, time, training and mental health of teachers, not forgetting the workload or the overload or burden that they have on their shoulders. I've got two school-going kids, and I can only imagine the workload of their class teacher, and then you've got extra activities and so forth and so on, sometimes even beyond the classroom, right? But just to go and to explore that a little bit, that then leads us back to a systemic issue, a systemic problem in which some deep-rooted change needs to happen.
It should, and I think a key component to that deep-rooted change is the role of parents, like CHERYL mentioned earlier on. Global stats show that although in Malaysia we are okay in certain parts of it, but our lowest scores actually goes towards parental involvement. Within the region, we are one of the lowest where parents actually get involved in the education of their child, whether how do they support them at home, how are they actually working together with the school to actually provide the best for their children. And I think you're absolutely right. But I would say that we need to focus on these specific components first, and at the same time look at it from a systemic perspective. The systems can change, the policies can change, but if it's not implemented effectively on the ground, it all falls apart. But there are key components that I've mentioned earlier on: the workload of teachers, the time, the training that they need, and most importantly, the support of the parents. All of it, I think we should put equal priority to each parts of it, mainly because I think for a lot of people out there, when we look at the potential of the Malaysian education system, we've got a lot of potential. We spend one of the highest when it comes to our budget allocation on education within Asia.
But potential untapped.
Exactly. And I think this is the common thing, right? We know we can do so much. Malaysia boleh at all of that, but we are just not achieving it, and we really need to identify why.
So you've come to that point, that boiling point where change must happen for us to be able to tap into this potential that we have in terms of skills and knowledge and even talent. CHERYL, we talk about mental health. The ministry has announced in this budget that it will support, some of the frameworks that can lead to the harms of social media, anti-bullying and so on, especially in schools. This is a response to growing concerns about student safety and about well-being as well. What should an effective framework really look like? Is it a one-size-fits-all? And how can this budget ensure that it's properly funded, but then, as you mentioned, Sam, also implemented? Yeah.
So I think any framework, especially things like anti-bullying, it cannot just be rhetorics, right? It cannot just be a slogan that we are saying without actually getting to the root of what does this mean. And like bullying in some schools or in some places have become so deeply rooted in the culture that it like you mentioned just now, right? This is a culture. It's almost a norm. Like, it's okay for a senior to bully a younger student and things like that. These are the things that you just have to accept. But I think the bullying frame, or like any sort of framework to prevent this, must also be a preventive framework. Like, that means you focus on how can we ensure schools are safe places? How can we ensure that we are creating a culture where we are prioritizing the mental health and well-being of our students, and the students are safe and happy to come to school.
I'm going to probe you a bit further there. Then the answer lies in the big question, how?
Yeah.
And what would your suggestion be?
So I like the idea of, like, I remember when in PEMIMPIN we used to do like well-being courses for our teachers, and how do they incorporate these well-being practices into their lessons. So you don't see this as an afterthought. You don't see well-being or anti-bullying as a
separate
by the way, we also need to make sure, or like something else that exists after school activities, but this is part of the curriculum. So the curriculum then focuses on how do I ensure you are safe, you are happy. If something is happening to you, where do you go and report? How do I ensure that you are every child in this classroom is playing their role to keep our classroom safe and happy? I think that sort of messaging is very important, rather than a anti-bullying sort of a messaging, right? So I like the idea of
oftentimes it starts with that subtle messaging, isn't it? It starts to be a joke, and then a little bit an extra bigger joke, and then it suddenly becomes what is quote-unquote a norm, and then it gets out of hand. We talk about safe spaces, we talk about inclusive. Sam, in terms of getting the gap closer for rural-urban disparities, where are we in terms of what needs to be done there? What more efforts can be push towards ensuring this gap is closed, especially when you look at the needs of special children as well, those underserved and with autism?
I think the ministry has been focusing a lot on access over the past few years to ensure that education institutions, especially primary and secondary school, access to those schools are spot on. They have invested quite significantly in infrastructure as well to ensure that every school provides the similar kind of facilities, whether you're in urban schools or whether in rural schools as well. But if we are speaking specifically about inclusive education, or we are speaking, I think one of the initiatives that was launched was an autism center for kids in different states. So I think currently they only have it in 2 states, if I'm not mistaken. One is in Kuala Lumpur, in Sentul. But I think it shouldn't end at I'm launching a space, I'm cutting the ribbon, hey, hurrah, congratulations everyone, we've got a space untuk pusat autism. It shouldn't end there. Especially for rural communities, I think the model has got to be a bit more flexible. Flexible in the sense that if the parents can't reach the those
Main
institutions.
center, yeah.
How are we going to get them? If last mile is the problem, how are we going to provide that transport? If awareness is a problem, how are we going to educate parents and all of this?
It must be far-reaching in its...
Exactly, and the model needs to be adaptive. For example, in the context that I used to teach in, it's also a lot about convincing parents. And the case in a lot of public schools right now is that let's say a child is identified to be having learning difficulties, and they will then speak to the parents and say that, hey, we need to send them for an assessment, and then they will then be brought into either a special education class or an inclusive measure within the existing classrooms. I think a big problem before having this infrastructure is that a lot of parents don't want to accept that their child needs special attention. So there is still that stigma that if your child is has a learning disability or a learning difficulty, to put it that way, they just don't accept it. So there are a significant number of kids.
Denial? Lack of awareness?
A bit of both, I would say. And we should say that we, from the ministry, from the government, and looking at the civil society space, we can't give the lack of awareness as an excuse. We need to bring it to them. We need to make sure that they are educated. And how are we doing that is extremely important. So I think having those buildings, having those schools, having those institutions are great. I think this is a first step towards providing access to special education services for all these children that need it in different parts of Malaysia. I think that's a great first step. But beyond that, the model has got to be flexible and suited to different contexts.
If you could suggest one way besides transport or last mile coverage as to how funds can really reach into classrooms and help to guide the teachers and to help really make that process a little bit more smooth flowing, what are some suggestions that you might have?
I think we should, number
Cheryl,
one...
please jump in. When you bring me with ideas as well.
Yeah, I think what we mentioned earlier on, a lot of these initiatives are targeting teachers, are targeting students directly, and a huge component that's missing from all of this is the parents.
But and parents' argument, if I could wear the devil's advocate at this point, its hat, it would say that I'm loaded with so many things of my own. There's work 9 to 5. Sometimes both parents are working. And so many.
I've heard stories of like friends or acquaintances that had to quit their job to send their child to the center in Sentul. Sacrifices and all of that.
But also not everyone has the luxury to do that, right? To be able to quit their jobs and all of that. But I think in terms of...
Because you think my child's going to school, it's taken care of. That portion of education, at least somewhat for majority part of it, is taken care of. But in changing times, that is not the case.
No, I think in terms of like how do we ensure the budget is going to this needs, right? I think we spoke about like ring fencing the budget to ensure that this amount is specifically going only to this cause. Like it won't be diverted into anything else or something general, right? And we see that often like happening, right? So especially if the budget is going, if you say, let's go to the anti-bullying framework. So if you say this budget is going to go for the anti-bullying framework, we must make sure that it's ring fence and it's really implementing end to end. So you're not just going to, identify the problem and then develop a beautiful framework and then that's it, right? But how do we see it till the conclusion of it, see it till the end until it's being implemented in school? And I also think besides parents, like getting teachers on as an important stakeholder in these discussions, even in the budget discussions, getting them involved in policy decisions and all of that remains very crucial. They are often at the receiving end of this, right? So they are like, all these decisions have already been made for them. Here, you just go to your classrooms and you just do it. You just do whatever context you're in. But then we know that maybe schools in Orang Asli villages are very different from schools in KL. Like no two schools in Malaysia is the same, right? So how do you ensure that you are involving all these stakeholders in these discussions around the implementation of the budget? I think that's also very crucial.
It's got to be ongoing. I think we have seen it happen at the beginning. So the model needs to be, I would say, dynamic in that sense. If there's a rollout of a first 3-year rollout plan, it needs to be dynamic. It needs to be open to taking criticisms, to improve, to pivot in certain areas.
Right, and so on that note, the government has proposed the establishment of what we know of as Majlis Pendidikan Negara, or the National Education Council, to coordinate some of these reforms on these must-dos across the ministries and education providers. What role do you see this body really playing? Do you think it will be efficient and effective enough? And how can it really ensure that reforms touch the ground and are implemented?
So I'm a bit of a skeptic with different councils and all that, only because I used to belong to one in 2018, and I think it's very tough. Okay, so the challenges are there when you form an independent body. But I think if we are starting fresh and we are saying, hey, this is a new council, we are coming in, I think very important is representation. Who is sitting in this council? We must ensure that the representation is diverse enough to be able to cover the needs of everyone in Malaysia. You must ensure that you have young people, parents, teachers, so that everyone has an equal say in what is going to happen in this council. And I think the other is ensuring that the council is truly independent and they have the they are able to do what they are supposed to do. I think that's it. Yeah.
I think they should be given that empowerment, that autonomy, because we would want a council with teeth, not just a council for the sake of having a council. And if the Majlis Pendidikan Negara, whatever we want to call it, I think they should be in a position to be able to, with the selection of the right individuals, to be able to cut through silos between the different ministries. I think that is important, because it's going to evolve Kementerian Kewangan, Kementerian Pendidikan, Kementerian Keluarga, all of this coming together, right? So you need individuals to be able to do that. And the silos that exist within the Ministry of Education itself, multiple divisions. You've got the MOE at the central level, federal level, you've got the state level, you've got the district level. As you break it down to different types of schools, you need people to be able to break through those silos. That's very important. But the second point that I like to say, that even if we have an MPN, we really need to be very clear what is their role and what are they going to achieve. That needs to be publicly available, and we as the general public need to keep them accountable. That transparency is something that we have yet to see. Even in the councils that we've been part of, there is no transparency. So we don't know where they're heading, and we can't ask them actually how many schools that you have done this is already at that level. So I would suppose something like a scorecard or a dashboard, things like that, needs to be publicly available. Because the more we preach about this idea of a whole of nation approach, it's also about us keeping the government accountable, the ministry accountable. It's not just about we be on the receiving end or being told when to do something and all that. It is the other way around as well. So I think this approach absolutely needs, because even for the council that CHERYL was at before, I think people still question actually what did they do? Exactly. What is the outcome?
Yeah. This is a deep dive into the topic of education, and a couple of minutes on national TV won't do it. We'll love to have you back here in the studio for more discussion. But if you had to sum it up, what's the one big move that you'd hope to see in the budget this year for teachers and students, CHERYL?
So I think back to my first point, the focus on foundational literacy and numeracy is very important. How can we continue to strengthen this among our students to ensure that they develop mastery and that there are no gaps in their literacy and numeracy until they reach Form 5? I think for me, that fundamentals, we cannot ignore it no matter what happens. So I would really love to see that being emphasized in the budget.
For me, it's how they're going to focus on implementation. That's all that matters to me, because if they can allocate the right amount of resources, the right amount of time to really ensure whatever that they have planned is executed well, I think we'll see some changes.
Well, here's looking with lots of hope towards what the budget 2026 has in store, especially for education. That's a wrap for our discussion.